Hi, Marcus. Thanks so much for taking the time to share a few thoughts on Vadis revenue operations and also private equity, since this is a large part of your client base nowadays. Part of the future of go-to-market is not only how do we close bigger deals faster, where do we get pipeline from, but also how do we operate revenue with marketing, sales, customer success, and also product and finance and strategy in many terms. You've been in the field for many, many years. You're one of the leading experts. I respect a ton in the field, especially for software, and also not just like venture back in the early stage, but also very established companies in private equity. Can you share a bit more about like why speed matters, as you put it in our briefing, and also what you see in the market that people can take to improve revenue operations today? Like once they press pause on this podcast, they could basically stop, do 3 things, and then listen to it again.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Manuel. Yeah. Thanks for the time. Super happy to be here. Yeah. So where do I start? Maybe I should explain a little bit why do I actually like and love RevOps. I'm quite passionate about it. So started my career actually in management consulting, and then joined Microsoft in 2002, the wonderful world of a large and high growth software company. And although I started as a salesperson, I quickly focused on how can I improve my outcomes, my own results, by basically engaging across the company with partners, with marketing, and it was quite successful with that. That led to an opportunity to join headquarters in 2006, and since that, then I'm really kind of taking care of enabling others to be more successful. In that case, it was other subsidiaries at Microsoft. I also spent time in incubation sales, which was about driving growth for newly acquired or organically grown businesses. And we had to apply a pretty comprehensive approach on how to define the go-to-market. So think about processes, of course, backed by a strong strategy. Then you need to have, of course, at Microsoft, strong product marketing. What are the systems and tools? What are aspects like compensation? How do you enable the people, and how do you measure the outcome? And that led me to understand, hey, this is an opportunity to really kind of continue to focus on that journey. Left Microsoft in 2012, started to work in startups and scale-ups in the US, helping build RevOps, well, at that time it was still called SalesOps, at smaller companies that were scaling, that had different types of problems, but they, again, were always attributable to those 5 pillars, as I call them. So what is your go-to-market strategy? Why are you going to market? Where and how? What are the processes? What are the execution elements? What do you need to do for your people? How do you enable them effectively? How do you drive productivity? What is the data model? How do you produce insights? How do you understand the measurability of the business? And then last but not least, systems and tools. What systems and tools do you use? And how does this all make sense together? And then returned to Germany in 2020, founded my own advisory firm in 2022. And now I'm happily working with venture capital backed and private equity backed companies on understanding how go-to-market efficiency drives, in the case of private equity, valuation success,
Yes.
value creation plans. And it is a very important driver for enterprise value, for a successful path of a company through the motions of being acquired, then growing and or transforming.
Yeah, and I think it's so key what you mentioned there in terms of enterprise value. I mean, enterprise value is strongly dependent on predictability as well of future cash flow, pretty much in private equity, my humble understanding. And very often when a private equity firm buys a company that might be like 7-figure EBITDA, they don't really understand what's going to happen because it's founder-led still after like some decades sometimes, and there's no CRM, there's no nothing. How do you see 3 things that I, as a PE, can embark on, at least on a journey, or like that I can do quickly to understand better how the business operates? Like what comes into the pipeline, how is velocity, conversion, deal size, how is retention, all these things that are typically not measured in a neat HubSpot dashboard when a PE buys a company.
Yeah, it's a good point, Manuel. I think so. What I usually find in my clients is an opportunity to take a close look at the go-to-market model and to get clarity on what really matters. Many companies over time have started, and I'm talking about mid-sized companies here, right? They are successful, but they have started to venture into go-to-market motions that are honestly maybe not really understood. And then the question is, how do you refocus on the ideal customer profile? That's one of the key things that I usually see adding a ton of value in the short term, right? And then related to that, narrowing down the go-to-market priorities to 1 or 2, maximum 3 core motions.
Yeah.
Less is more, right? That's very important.
Yeah.
Play to your strengths. Get those motions right. Apply efficiency levers to those motions, and almost, I would venture to say, forget the rest. Or set up structured incubation motions, but don't try to do too much. And then another key element that I see adding value, especially in early stage engagements, is just take a look at the incentive system. So how are people in the go-to-market organization incentivized, motivated? How does that comp look like? Is it attached and linked to objectives in a clear way? Are we driving the right behaviors? So those are kind of 3 things that I usually look at, and I usually find strong opportunities to either improve slightly or restart. In some cases, there's a complete re-architecture that happens, but it depends on each case. It also depends on the industry. As you know, industries behave differently in regards of go-to-market, but there are some commonalities, of course, and those 3 things that I mentioned usually are common problems and also opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. And I think mindset matters here a lot. As you say, like, hey, it's common problems or opportunities, like how people say, like, oh, this is wrong, this is right, this needs to happen. I mean, you can run 5 go-to-market motions in parallel, right? Like the same way you can do CrossFit, 100-meter runs, ultras, play squash and go snowboarding. You will just not be particularly good at any of those at a reasonable investment of focus, time, and energy. And all what I found really interesting of what you just mentioned is, like, on the metrics that you measure, like how you incentivize people, that's not even industry dependent, right? That's just very human. If you incentivize somebody on like new logos, they will just say, like, write me a check for like $1. Sign this thing at a 90% discount. I just need the logo, and they will rack up logos. That's what they will do. So I started in commission only sales, and it was like, for us, it was revenue and net revenue retention needed to be 2 years pretty much. Then you get paid fully. The competitive organization was new logos, and it was very simple that somebody just bring me 5 new logos, just bring me 5 checks of like $50, and people ended up saying, like, please sign here. You can go to the bank over there and cancel again, and money never hits the bank. So they've not been incentivized on net revenue, like on cash to the bank, and it led to total moral hazard risk. Everybody always had their birthday every day, exactly, especially to the opposite gender. Cash flow was very little, I guess. Was fun for the salespeople, but that's just one example that I still remember 16 years later. Some parts are also harder to make them happen from an analog transformation for humans, right? Like if you say, let's go to market motion. If somebody runs a product-led motion, a marketing-led motion, a sales-led motion, and then like an enterprise sales motion of like 6-figure deals and partner-led sales, pretty much. Sometimes the real revenue operations advice is like, do less, like kill 2 motions. But there's teams attached, there's market attached, there's brand attached to it. How do you go about helping people embark on this journey and actually executing on the hard things, right? Because it has an impact on teams, on culture, on brand, on identity.
Yeah, it's maybe the core question. I would relate it to what usually happens in private equity portfolio companies. There's a mix of growth, a strong expectation toward efficient growth, not growth at all costs.
Yes.
By the way, always has been the case in private equity. It's always about efficiency. You always directly look at the bottom line. And then there's the other part of the equation is transformation. These companies usually go through pretty strong and quite extensive transformations. There's usually an inorganic growth plan attached, meaning how we're going to acquire other companies. The moment that happens, that's of course a challenge for the whole setup of revenue, what revenue operation stands for. How do you integrate the processes? How do you manage, again, different compensation cultures and even frameworks? How do you get the systems and tools to work? So when you look at growth, efficient growth and transformation, that's kind of the context of the problem solving that RevOps needs to drive. And then it's about very structured prioritization and linkage to company objectives. And also going down the road of the famous RevOps roadmap, which I always recommend to basically have very strongly established, which is basically a list of initiatives that the RevOps team is driving additionally to the business as usual. And those initiatives, they need to have strong measurability. They need to be linked to company objectives. And by doing so, you basically have a clear answer to the why. Why are we looking at replacing our or improving our quote to cash process? Why are we starting an effort to restructure or redefine our ICP? Why are we starting to look at AI as a driver for additional productivity layers in certain aspects of the go-to-market motion? So that's very clear to have not only a clarity in the why, but also in regards of how does measurable outcome actually add value to the company. And that's kind of what drives the priority setting. And then it's, of course, also linking it with capacity. As usual in RevOps, you have more projects and more opportunities to drive things than you have time, than you have money. So you need to then drive that clear communication, I always say, up and down the organization. And in order to basically be very clear about what you stand for from a go-to-market motion perspective, from a go-to-market evolution perspective, and how you drive that, and what are the topics that you actually take on, and which are the topics that you maybe outsource, right? There's a good opportunity to work with outsourced partners, with consulting companies, with service providers to get more done, but still, go-to-market, the go-to-market team, namely RevOps, should be in control and basically have the overall visibility about what happens to drive those outcomes.
Yeah, 100% agree. And now that you mentioned AI and RevOps quite a few times, right? You mentioned like the RevOps team. How many times do you actually encounter in acquired companies in PE already existing revenue operations and AI capabilities and capacity and also commitment? So the commitment needs to be there, right? Like I think a PE saying something like it's like how a PE back group CEO told me once, like, look, if my PE tells me something, it's like my parent back in the old days, like, go play soccer. Like it will nearly disincentivize me to play soccer, even if I like it. If a peer group CEO from another private equity backed B2B software conglomerate tells me like, hey, worked with Marcus, it was amazing how we increased EBITDA by 2.3x thanks to his revenue operating guidance. That's much more powerful. But that's the commitment side. How much capacity in terms of like focus, time, and energy, and how much capabilities in terms of knowledge, skill set, experience do you typically encounter in these situations, and how much needs to be backfilled by external partners?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I always say that the company doesn't need to find revenue operations. It's the other way around. Revenue operation needs to find the company at its stage of maturity, of evolution, and there are of course vast differences, especially if you look at different industries. If we look at the maybe adoption fastest industry, clearly B2B SaaS and tech, where innovation in regards of process efficiency happens, almost normally. Well, that's not the case in other industries, and I've had the chance to work with industrial companies, with financial services, and you basically need to have a good feel and understanding about where the pain points are, and then linking that with the existing capacity set and capability set. Usually there is someone managing a system where accounts and active opportunities are managed, and that's basically the root. Somebody manages that system, and in some cases also focuses and is concerned about the processes and the workflows. That's where operational excellence starts. And the idea is, and I'm often asked to then put together a blueprint and say, okay, how can we evolve this? What do we need to be successful, right? And then it's about to be very focused and lean and cost conscious in regards of adding those capabilities, in regards of defining, managing end-to-end processes, enabling users to have delightful experiences as they do their jobs, setting up compensation models that make sense, looking at the system and tools and the tech stack overall, is it overly complex? Can we reduce technical debt? Those are key questions that always come up, and then you gradually move toward something that you can call sales ops. And by the way, many companies don't use the RevOps term; they call it sales ops. Totally okay. The label doesn't matter. What's more important is the charter and the definition of why do you have an entity that drives operational excellence for go-to-market, and what is the specific expectation and the capacity to add value for that entity. And that's basically the key driver to then determine a tailored approach that addresses capabilities. Sometimes it is about hiring new leadership and basically starting from zero. Sometimes it is about adding elements that are missing. In regards of data and AI, it is a key question that all the portfolio companies I work with are asking themselves proactively, and of course also driven by the expectation of the respective investor. And I don't know of one company that is not right now working on a plan, at least a plan, if not pilot efforts, pilot projects to look at the right use cases and understand how Gen AI can add value to the organization. And it's a very interesting time to see how quickly that is evolving.
Yes.
And then also, I always speak about, don't start with AI without looking at the underlying process and data infrastructure and architecture, because if that's not okay, AI will only make it worse, right? So you need to basically have that solid foundation of really understanding how the process flow works, how the systems and tools support nowadays, where are user engagement points, and then adding to that an understanding of what's possible in AI, and then, building a case that says, okay, yes, let's look at kind of at addressing this opportunity, this use case with measurable outcomes.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned there on, like, it's an opportunity first game, right? And I think the labels even hurt the discipline a bit, like RevOps, GTM engineering, AI modeling, and then nobody knows what it means. It's like if you're invited to like a dinner and it's like the dress code is smart casual. What does that even mean? Like, just tell me, like, shall I bring a shirt? Shall I bring a tie? Like, I'm fine, but tell me what it is about. So I think any B2B software company that I've seen in SaaS, first it was always agentic AI, blah, blah, blah. And then it ended up being like 3 to 5 words. Like for us, it was like AI first, data integration, transformation, and categorization with 36 proprietary algorithms at first. And that was back in 2017. In the end, it was onboard products faster online to sell more before your competition with AI. Like if somebody asked, like we had a slide and we picked the one from the white paper with the most Greek letters, so somebody could have a laugh. It's like, okay, the AI stuff, we know the industry discipline, what needs to happen. Like, help us make it 10 times faster, like 10 times leaner with AI, whatever the AI does. So I think a big part is not obsessing about the tooling and the terminology and like VM1 and whatever volumetric,
Exactly.
and just speaking plain English and German with people here.
Yeah, exactly. As you say, so it's about, I always, I prefer to stay away from vanity discussions, which don't lead to any outcomes other than, just hot air, and rather make it relevant by linking it to the operating model, the ideal state of the operating model of the respective go-to-market organization. And that needs to be defined. And that's a lot of work sometimes. And I have a client right now where we really had to re-architect and rebuild the whole go-to-market motion, because although they were successful and actually profitable selling their product and services, there was a huge opportunity to rebuild the way the go-to-market motion was structured, organized, and then supported by systems and tools before even any discussion in regards of AI could start. So you basically need to look at the foundation first, and that sets up that very solid, scalable baseline, almost like the foundation for growth. And then in matters about AI, it's not about, okay, pick the use case and let's go, but rather let's understand again, how does the company operate? Where are the leverage points to basically look at how can Gen AI add value? And then be very careful in determining that clear measurement framework, and also have clear expectations about why do we go and why do we start. So many projects actually are not well defined, and then they end up in lack of acceptance, lack of commitment. lack of clarity. It's almost back to basics, right? When you start any consulting engagement, you want to have clear requirements. You want to have a clear analysis and understanding of the situation. It's the same with AI. So you need to really go deep and really understand what's going on, rather than jumping on, the hype and saying, oh yeah, we're running 7 AI projects, but not really understanding
Yeah.
why they're here and what's the
What's the
expectation of
definition of
that.
done? What's the definition of done? What's the smart, like the specific, measurable, actionable,
Exactly.
relevant, time bound hypothesis that we have? So we measure against this baseline, and it could be better or worse. But I see this so many times in also software purchasing, and people buy software and it will fix magically everything. People buy HubSpot and say like HubSpot is expensive. I pay 50K for HubSpot a year and a
Yeah.
team of 10. I don't even know how you do that. I think by buying all Hubs and the Enterprise Edition. And like, so what's done for you, right? Like, when are you successful? And people, I don't know. Now everything's orange. It should be amazing, right? Like, no, this is never how technology works, right? Like, give you a car with a Ferrari and then you
Yeah.
drive it into the next wall because it's powerful. It's not useful. It's actually
It's
something I train
ex-
in a gym where there's actually like a few like elite bodybuilders training there, right? Like, and
okay.
like there's probably substances more involved than protein shakes, right? But what one guy told me in the wardrobe once was like, look, like, yes, we took this stuff, we take that stuff, but we started on it like once we had reasonable metrics. Like, once we've been at 200 kilo deadlifts, 100 kilo bench press, once we hit the gym 5, 6 times a week, we eat
Yeah.
properly, and then we enhance that with what needs to be done to become like on elite level in the sport. But now you see 16-year kids running around on steroids, basically. While they don't understand the movement, they don't understand recovery, they don't understand nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
advocating for steroids here at all, but the opposite, like to just clearly learn the fundamentals and execute and get consistency. And then you
Yeah.
can add AI to make it better. Then you can add technology to send
Exactly. And
those emails you would send manually to create the content you should create. But it needs clarity first.
exactly, you need to build foundations. And one of those key aspects that really needs to be understood well is what is the underlying data model. So basically, how are data groups
Yeah.
linked? How are data gathered? What are the systems that have the mastery of certain elements of data? How do data flow? Who owns them? What is their definition? What is the business and technical definition of key KPIs? And that's also very foundational, by the way, not even for AI. It's actually foundational for everything that you do in basically transforming and improving a go-to-market motion. You want to have a clear understanding of the data model. And many
Can you
companies
explain that a bit? Because
underestimate that.
you mentioned the data model 4 or 5 times. You and I know what we mean by that, and like bow tie model and volumetrics and so on. Can you explain in plain English, in 3 sentences, what is a data
Yeah.
model for go-to-market? Like why does it matter? How does it work? How can I use it today?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, if you think about, let's start with the business objective. So you want to always allow for faster transitions, for faster conversion between, let's say, a lead and an opportunity and a win.
Yes.
Right. And if we translate that into the usual speak and the usual lingo, that's basically how can we move more MQLs faster to SQLs, marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, to opportunities to wins. And then you go, okay, what is really an MQL? How is it defined? How do we measure it? What are the criteria?
Yeah.
What is an MQL, right? And that's how you basically get into building the foundation of the data model, because you need to define what are the metrics, how are they defined? Is there a common understanding across all players in go-to-market about what these metrics really stand for? And based on that understanding, you can then establish a data flow. And of course, you mentioned it, the bow tie and of course, funnel, right? So we have this understanding of, we have an acquisition funnel where we have many opportunities, many leads, usually associated to your targetable, addressable market, and then your serviceable, obtainable market, and all that good theory. And it translates really into volume metrics, meaning how many leads do you really have, and how many of those turn into qualified leads, and how many of those turn into SQL, sales qualified leads. And in order to then answer the why question, or basically go back to the objective, which is we want to transition faster, we want to have better conversion rates, you need to understand how you measure it. And that is the start of having a data model.
Yeah.
And then communicating that also across the organization so that you speak one language. For example, the classic issue of marketing understanding something different in regards of their objectives of what they need to produce as for pipeline insights or pipeline inflow, and sales expectations might be disassociated or not 100% aligned. It usually, when you find that, usually it's also a metrics question and a lack of clarity in regards of the data model.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important what you mentioned there of having a unified language for marketing, sales, and customer success. From
Exactly. And of
awareness,
course,
from zero
further,
to awareness, to education, to selection, to commitment, to sign first offer,
yeah,
to retention, like onboarding, retention,
yeah.
expansion, and refers. And I mean, how
And
I
if
can,
I may
for sure.
add quickly, so what I just this is the process view of the data model, and then there's of course the technology view of the data model, which is equally important. You really need to understand where do which data sit and where's the mastery. So which data do you generate and pull and transform in the CRM system? Which data, most likely related to accounts and the associated revenue outcomes, are managed in jointly in CRM and maybe in ERP, so an enterprise resource planning or whatever backend system is there to basically count money. And you need to understand how these systems play together. And also it gets down then to a technical discussion about, okay, how do we build integrations so that we have clear data flows and we understand which direction data are pushed across the systems. And then and all of that is basically needed to really build a data model that is actionable and actually adds value. So it cannot stop on just building a beautiful slide. You really need to then go into execution and talk to the experts. Ideally, you have a powerful IT team, you have a powerful BI understanding, and you build that capability for the organization. And this is an investment that is usually very important because it goes beyond the actual go-to-market problematic. It's actually something that supports the whole company to basically operate in a much more efficient level.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so key, that what is nothing without how, right? And people sometimes have
Exactly.
these amazing metrics, and then you ask them like, okay, where do you measure? Like nowhere. So for example, I just bought the Whoop band, and before I couldn't even measure heart rate. Like, I mean, lost my Oura ring a long time ago and didn't replace it. And then I was curious, like, how can I measure this in different circumstances? So for example, digital says like, yes, we can record this call. How do I do this? Like, how do I get a transcript and insights? If I have physical conversations at an event, do I put on my mobile phone and capture the call and then
Exactly.
upload in audio files? Or the little things matter, but I mean, for us, and we discuss this a lot in pipeline generation, right? Because people ask, like, are you a setter? Do you generate calls? I was like, calls are customer acquisition costs. And without customer acquisition, it's actually just cost. If I play soccer, I go on a pitch, and you want 10 calls a month from me. You can have them tomorrow, Saturday, if I have a match, like with 11 people on the field. So I ask 10 friends, please book a call. So you get 10 calls. But that's not
Yeah.
weight the pipeline. That's not future revenue. That's not future cash. That's not the lifeblood of your business. So I started to explain it to especially like B2B software founders, like in very plain terms of like, look, future revenue is weighted pipeline. Like, weighted comes from the probability of you closing a certain deal at a certain point in time based on awareness and education and demand that your marketing team captured, in a sense, and the job of your sales team is to convert demand into revenue. That's what it is in plain English. And revenue is volume times probability times in conversion times deal size times velocity
Yeah.
times how
Yeah.
fast do you use it. And velocity is actually your capacity. If you wait in line in a supermarket or at a show, like, velocity matters because it determines if you are 10 people standing in line for a sandwich. If velocity is a minute, you wait for 10 minutes. If velocity is an hour, you wait for 10 hours. So that matters a lot on the capacity of that shop to make money. And I think a lot
Exactly.
of time people underestimate velocity. And so like, we need to hire like 3 more salespeople. Like, well, it depends. What's your sales velocity? Like, how long does it take you to go from first conversation to close one? Like, well, 6 months. Okay, so like, how many deals can your average sales rep take on at the same time? Like, well, 10. So you actually have a deal capacity of 20 deals. If you win a
Yeah.
quarter of those, like, you can only close 5 deals a year per rep. But if your sales velocity would increase to 2 months versus 6 months, you could do 3 times as many deals without adding capacity given enough pipeline.
Yeah.
So that's the plain English language I came to use versus the fancy MQL, SQL, NRR, ACV, SaaS lingo,
Well,
which people like to celebrate in their own circle. But especially with like PE-backed entrepreneurs, they've grown up in times they never raised venture capital. They never needed to fill out those fancy slides of NRR in year number 2, where a venture capitalist is asking like, "What's your customer lifetime value?" And they need to write something in year 1, and they don't know.
yeah. So you mentioned CLTV, customer lifetime value, and other. So that those are unit economic metrics, which I wouldn't. They're super important, but going back to how do we explain a data model, I wouldn't even go that far initially.
Yeah.
I would say, look, you just need to know how to measure the different steps of actually production of value across the process that leads to a good outcome, which is you either win a good customer outcome, a new customer, or you expand an existing relationship, you sell more.
Yes.
So what are the steps that get there? And you need to start measuring those steps, because otherwise you don't know how much capacity you really need, to your point about capacity. And that's kind of how things flow together, because once you have that data model established and the key measure points, then you can actually start asking interesting questions about how do we get more effective? How do we get more efficient? How do we do things the right way, and how do we do the right things? And that those are key questions that everybody will understand. Every senior leader of any company is focused on that. And nowadays you have, and especially again back to the private equity situation, you have a very clear structured focus on managing costs. And that's extremely healthy, right? Something that in the venture capital world only came up once people realized, hey, the cheap money is no longer growing on the trees. We're going to have to basically be efficient in our growth, and then the cost equation becomes much more relevant. Well, private equity has always focused on being cost efficient. EBITDA is everything. So, and that helps in regards of driving the understanding about why we also need to be efficient in setting up our go-to-market motion, right? So you basically go through an open door in that regard, and capacity is always limited. The situation of somebody saying, "Oh, I'm just going to add three more AEs in order to increase my sales outcomes," well, that's of course the wrong question to ask in an environment where you basically need to think about how to be efficient at any moment in time.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think this cost discipline or investment discipline, right? I think private equity is still fine to invest $100,000 if it makes $1 million more, or if it like increases EBITDA by 100K at an established company. The EBITDA multiple is in software probably anywhere between 10 and 25, like for software, for like professional service, anywhere between like 5 and 10. So I think EBITDA, like in my experience, private equity is still fine to put money out there if they can expect like their money to come back as EBITDA within due time, like within typical time horizon of overall like 3 to 5 years, but usually probably 6 to 12 months within that hypothesis.
Yeah, exactly. You look for the value creation plan is basically the vehicle to get there, and then you look at, okay, what are the levers on that value creation plan to basically drive additional business unit, the organic growth, inorganic growth. It's always a balance between growth and, again, efficient growth and transformation. Many companies actually choose a way to complement their product portfolio by purchasing other companies. You see carve-outs and carve-out related integrations happening in this space, and that creates a different notion of running, again, focusing on go-to-market efficiency and go-to-market operations, because it adds an additional layer of complexity. How do you integrate those sales motions? How do you do that efficiently? Do you adapt the processes? Maybe you find some good practices. How do you integrate them or not? There's many questions associated to that. Last but not least, the data question, right? You acquire a new company, and they operate under a different data model. How do you manage that, right?
Yeah.
So host of challenges that are unique to, especially private equity portfolio companies, especially if you look at the transformation lever, which is of course a very strong one, right? And then of course the transformation that happens from within, where you see often that the investor makes a decision to basically transform also on the people side by bringing in very impressive, very experienced, very capable senior talent into the organization and basically relaunching innovation from within. And that also, of course, has its manifestation in how the go-to-market motion is set up and relates with the other parts of the organization. And last point I want to make here is the relationship and linkage to product, right? So product and or services is very important from the very first moment. And it's often also a little bit underserved, right? And I always say, look, if you really want to be effective and successful in go-to-market operations or RevOps, whatever label we pick, you better understand the product, the service, how it adds value in the market, and actually what's the point of persuasion. So, I always tell, younger RevOps leaders, do spend time in the field where the rubber hits the road, because that's the only way to really learn how things are happening, where the value is added, where the issues are in regards of processes, in regards of productivity, in regards of efficiency. And you need to take that understanding, that affinity for the business into how you operate as a leader. And that's usually a good recipe for success.
Yeah, because recurring revenue comes from recurring impact, and that comes from recurring value creation, right? Many B2B SaaS leaders are just starting to grasp that. I think that they just sold like 1 year, 3-year contracts in SaaS because it was fancy to buy SaaS. And now people ask like, okay, but how does it create impact? What are the metrics that I can expect to improve? And they're like, that's a good question. I had the conversation once with a revenue leader, and it's like, okay, what specific metric do you help me improve? And it's like, we have a dashboard with many KPIs, with many metrics, like not my question. Which specific metric? What's the leading indicator it improve? And what are the secondary KPIs that help me increase EBITDA, basically? And like, I don't know. Like, well, if you don't know, like, how shall I know? Like, you're the revenue leader of that company, right? And so no deal. Hey, I think, Marcus, we could go on for like 2 hours, go full on Joe Rogan, Stephen Bartlett here. But maybe one last question from my side, and one that the last guest left you in Stephen's tradition. What's one thing where you see like RevOps changing drastically in private equity in 2026? What's one thing you see that many people don't see yet?
That's a great question. I think so I'm not going to jump on the standard answer, which is, of course, AI is front and center. Yes, I'm going to take that for granted. So you need to use the rest of 25 in order to get ready for planning for 26 and really make sure that you don't look at AI as an afterthought. You need to basically have a good answer to the question, how and where and why would AI make sense to add additional layers of efficiency to the go-to-market operation?
Yeah,
that is a must. That is I would say the go-to-market leader, the CRO, the RevOps leader that is not thinking actively and actually putting a plan together in that regard will have a hard time when 26 planning really starts. So
because if you don't put in the work in the diagnostic phase, you're going to operate on things that might not be the right things to operate, and you're going to waste capacity, and you're going to make 6-figure mistakes without solving problems.
Because let's not forget, I mean, you want to make an investment in basically introducing a cleverly designed and well, diagnosed AI-based solution to increase efficiency. Well, it's going to cost money initially, so there's a budget question. And you want to have a clear plan and how that budget ask is actually rooted in a credible add of additional productivity layers. So you better start early in answering that or in asking that question and put together a plan so that you're not surprised when it comes to planning. So that's one. The other aspect is I see, if you look at just the systems and tools aspect, I still see a lot of opportunity to look at systems and tools with a lens of less is more, right? There's many companies that basically jump from, we have a problem, let's go find a tool that addresses it. And they basically jump over, what's the business process that we're actually trying to support and how do we support it in a better way? So, and I find that very often, and this is maybe for 26 is the year where, and maybe driven by the push toward having an answer to the AI question, you really need to ask the fundamental questions first. what is the business process that we are going to support by automation. And by the way, not every automation should be and can be AI. You can get a lot of cool stuff done by just applying common sense, and going back to basics, and then also reducing tech debt by doing that analysis and saying, okay, we're going to be able to save some cost because this tool, really, we can replace it by determining a different process flow, by basically enabling people differently. So I would say kind of, back to basics is kind of the one-liner I would say for 26.
Yeah, love that one-liner. And in closing remarks, since I think we discussed a lot around the question also, how can we become faster again in sales in these uncertain times? Maybe one last closing thought on that. How can revenue operations help increase sales velocity in these uncertain times where people rather not make a mistake than take a leap of faith and invest into innovation?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, back to why question of go-to-market. So I often see go-to-market leaders and their respective operations teams, so RevOps teams, very much being, and understandably, having to spend a ton of time in what I call the core operating model. So processes, systems and tools, data and enablement, and not spending enough time on actually looking at the underlying strategy.
Yeah.
So, what is the model that we should apply to be successful in this market? What segmentation do we use? Do we do a 2.5 stage go-to-market model? Those questions, they need to be addressed very clearly and strongly. And only if you have that full understanding, you can then go and add value. And then you basically elevate the story of RevOps being kind of the team that runs the CRM, which, in often many companies it is, to we are the business partner for go-to-market success. We are the control tower. We are the entity that helps steer the business because we do understand the business. We are rooted deeply in the strategy, and we are basically if you think about a hub and spoke model, selfishly we're going to put RevOps in the middle, but you cannot get anything done if you have the other partners defined clearly: finance, legal, product, of course, sales development, marketing, customer success. So you need to think in terms of how do you connect the dots. And that's also maybe something that many companies are now realizing, that in RevOps, you have a great function that naturally needs to be able to connect the dots in order to be successful. You just cannot look and cannot operate in silos. It just doesn't make sense. So you rather take that as an opportunity and say, okay, I'm a CRO, I'm a CEO, I'm going to hold my RevOps team accountable to really look beyond the obvious, to really have this broad view of the horizon and really understand what goes on in the company, and then act accordingly, both strategically and tactically.
Very much agree. And then go from a plan to an execution schedule and get it operationally done right. What's one short question that you wish I would have asked you, but I didn't, that I should leave for the next podcast guest?
Oh, that's cool. I'm a big fan of always thinking that ultimately, and this was a great conversation, one. We really enjoyed it. We're talking about many different topics that we both are very passionate about. But ultimately, it's people that engage in the strategy, drive the processes, use systems and tools, manage data. What is the people aspect that is nowadays most important? And how do we ensure that we're showing enough empathy for, motivations, backgrounds, biases, because ultimately what we're doing is basically a people business. And I think that's something that oftentimes is not, discussed well enough to really understand that, to me, one of the key drivers for any company success, not only in go-to-market, is basically having a strong people strategy, being very focused on ensuring that people can feel motivated, that they do understand their why at individual level, at team level, at company level. And I think that's a key topic. We didn't discuss it today, but it's very, very dear to my heart.
Very much looking forward to discuss this with the next podcast guest, and feel free to tune in the episode towards the end as well. Markus, thank you so much for sharing all these insights gained from 2 decades in the field, and really looking forward to see you have more positive impact on private equity with hands-on revenue operations, without making it only like the data model, but getting it on the ground, increase EBITDA quickly, while not increasing cost base by just hiring more people where actually better revenue operations can do. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks for having me.